Hello, learners. Today we are going to discuss global policy and women's health rights. In the interconnected world, the health of a woman in a remote village is increasingly dictated by decisions made in the boardrooms of Geneva, New York, and Washington, D.C. Global health policies are no longer just idealistic guidelines. They are powerful transformations that determine funding flows, clinical standards, and the legal recognition of bodily autonomy. This section explores how international mandates, ranging from the Sustainable Development Goals to the Right to Health frameworks, serve as the blueprints for national healthcare services. It investigates the critical role these policies play in transforming women from passive recipients of medical care into active rights holders, while also confronting the implementation gap, where high-level diplomacy often struggles to dismantle deeply entrenched local barriers. The transition towards clinical justice on a global scale requires an understanding that a medical prescription is often only as effective as the policy environment in which it is written. Let us understand the Millennium Development Goals era first. During the Millennium Development Goal, popularly known as MDG era, the global gaze was microscopic, focusing on the single urgent crisis like maternal deaths. Success was measured almost exclusively by the maternal mortality ratio, MMR, a metric that, while vital, often reduced women to demographic units. In this framework, a woman's primary health value was tied to her reproductive output. Her goal was to successfully produce a child without dying in the process. This narrow focus created a survival-only model of care. If a woman survived the immediate window of childbirth, the policy's job was considered complete. This approach resulted in a fragmented system that largely ignored the continuum of care, neglecting what happened before conception or after delivery. Furthermore, it created a massive blind spot for health issues unrelated to reproduction, such as non-communicable diseases, mental health, and geriatric care. In this period was one of the biological reductionism, where a woman's life was valued primarily through the lens of maternal survival rather than lifelong well-being. The MDG era highlighted the implementation gap in its most basic form. While the world got better at preventing death, it failed to improve the quality of life. Women were saved from mortality only to be returned to environments of time poverty and structural disempowerment, where their health was still not their own. This era proved that while the biomedical goal of not dying is essential, it is low bar for the global health policy that claims to value health sovereignty. Then came the Sustainable Development Goals era, SDGs era. The global transition from MDGs to SDGs represent a fundamental shift in how the international community conceptualizes a woman's body and her place in society. This evolution moved the global health blueprint from the narrow focus on biological survival towards a comprehensive model of health sovereignty and human rights. During the MDG era, the global gaze was microscopic, focusing on single urgent crisis, maternal death. Success was measured almost exclusively by the maternal mortality ratio, a metric, as we said, which was vital but often reduced women to demographic units, as documented in the United Nations 2015 Millennium Development Goals report. In this framework, a woman's primary health goal was to successfully produce a child without dying in the process, as we explained. Now, this approach created a survival-only model of care. If a woman survived the immediate window of childbirth, the policy's job was considered completed. As Schott and Zetcher points out in 2022 in their analysis of women's health beyond reproduction, this narrow focus largely ignored the continuum of care, neglecting what was happening before and after delivery. By 2026, we recognize this period as one of the biological reproductionism, where a woman's life was valued primarily through the lens of maternal survival rather than lifelong well-being, a myth of experience often explored in the work of Usher 2011. The transition to Sustainable Development Goal broadened the lens from a woman's biological function to her inherent right. This era introduced the critical concept of universal access to sexual and reproductive health, moving beyond the narrow confines of the labor ward to encompass a holistic vision of well-being. A shift codified in the United Nations 2023 Sustainable Development Goals report. The policy shift acknowledged that a woman's health includes her right to decide if and when to have children, like contraception, her access to preventive care like cervical cancer screening, and her mental and social well-being. This framework recognizes women as agent of change rather than passive recipient of care. According to WHO 2024, under this blueprint, health is no longer a gift or a charity from the state, but a fundamental entitlement that must be protected through inclusive laws and gender-sensitive systems. By centering the health agency, the SDGs provide this architecture necessary to bridge the implementation gap and ensure that bodily autonomy is a protected right for all. Let us understand the impact of 1994 Cairo Conference, popularly known as ICPD Cairo. Before 1994, global health policies were largely institutionalized, treating women's bodies as mere variables in a demographic equation. As Short and Zacher 2022 illustrate in their historical overview of women's health, international aid during this era was frequently tied to population stabilization targets rather than individual well-being. This top-down pressure led many nations to implement coercive sterilization programs or offer incentives for contraception that bypass true informed consent, prioritizing state goals over personal autonomy. The primary concern of this era was a Malthusian fear that high birth rate in the global south would inevitably lead to environmental collapse and economic instability. In this framework, a woman's value was measured not by her health or agency, but by her non-fertility. This instrumentalist approach is a clear example of what Crenshaw 1989 identifies as the erasure of marginalized voices, where the state's desire for management overrides the individual's right to bodily sovereignty. The global health communities view this period as a cautionary tale of how the medical gaze can be weaponized for geopolitical ends. It highlights a significant model conflict between a state's demographic interests and a woman's fundamental right to health. This history underscores why the shift to a right-based framework was not just a policy change, but a necessary moral correction to ensure that medicine is never again used as a tool for demographic engineering. The 1994 Cairo Conference represents the most significant paradigm shift in the history of global health, as it effectively overturned the demographic model by placing individual agency at the center of development. As noted in the UNFP 2024 retrospective on population dynamics, the conference argued that the state has no inherent right to dictate family size. Rather, it has a binding duty to provide the social and clinical conditions under which women can make their own autonomous choices. A radical change introduced by the consensus was the replacement of clinical and cold-term population control with sexual and reproductive health and rights, SRHR. This linguistic shift, as Short and Zacher 2022 described in their analysis of reproductive evolution, asserted that health is an end in itself, a fundamental human right, rather than a mere means to slow down birth rates for macroeconomic stability. By 2026, SRHR is the gold standard for clinical justice, ensuring that medical interventions prioritize the person over the statistics. The Cairo Consensus famously established that the most effective way to stabilize population growth is not through coercion, but by empowering women. The UNFPA 2024 reports emphasize that reproductive health is inextricably linked to education, economic opportunities, and political participation. When a woman is educated and financially independent, she naturally exercises greater control over her reproductive life, proving that the health agency is the most powerful tool for social development. This effectively bridged the gap between the micro reality of women's body and the macro goal of global policy. For the first time in history, in the 1994 Cairo Consensus provided a global treaty that defined reproductive health holistically, moving the clinical standard far beyond the mere absence of disease or infirmity. As the World Health Organization 2024 emphasizes in its current guideline on health and human rights, this framework shifted the medical focus towards a positive state of physical, mental, and social well-being. This transition effectively dismantled the biological reductionism of previous decades, replacing it with a multidimensional view of female body. A cornerstone of this holistic definition is the right to a satisfying and safe sex life. By 2026, it is recognized as a critical health component that acknowledges both pleasure and safety as essential to the women's overall wellness. As Usher 2011 argues in a work on the myth and experience of women's health, separating sexual health from the pathology of reproduction allows for a more authentic and non-stigmatizing clinical encounter. Furthermore, the treaty protects the capability of reproduction, which includes not only the prevention of pregnancy but also access to fertility care and the right to safe motherhood. This is intrinsically linked to the freedom of decide, which grants women the absolute authority to determine if, when, and how often of childbearing without state of familial coercion. According to Short and Jeter 2022, this triad of safety, capability, and freedom is the bedrock of bodily sovereignty, ensuring that a woman's reproductive life is governed by her own agency rather than external demographic targets. The ICPD Program of Action is a parent document of the SDGs. Without the Cairo Consensus, the modern focus of universal health coverage, UHC, and gender equality would not exist. It shifted the medical gaze from the state's interest to the women's lived experience, asserting that women are not vessels for population management, but sovereign architects of their own future. The global landscape of women's health is governed by a powerful triad of international organizations. While their methods differ, ranging from scientific standard setting to supply chain management and economic leverage, their combined influence dictates how healthcare services are structured, funded, and experienced by women on ground. The WHO serves as the supreme technical authority. It does not typically run clinics, but it defines exactly what happens inside them. Its power lies in setting the global standard that national health ministries use to draft their own clinical protocols. As noted in the World Health Organization 2024 report, when the WHO releases a handbook on safe abortion or intrauterine care, it becomes the universal scientific benchmark. Through initiatives like respectful maternity care, the WHO has shifted the global standards from mere physical survival to include the psychological and emotional dignity of women. Furthermore, by standardizing how maternal mortality and morbidity are tracked, the WHO ensures that the countries are held to a universal matrix of success, turning data into a tool for systemic accountability. If the WHO is about policy, the United Nations Population Fund, UNFPA, is about procurement and presence. Their mission is to ensure that every pregnancy is wanted and every childbirth is safe. They manage what can be described as the supply chain of agency, acting as the world's largest provider of contraceptives to developing nations and ensuring birth control reaches the last mile, even in conflict zones. The UNFPA is also the primary global advocate for midwifery. By training thousands of midwives annually, they move care away from over-medicalized settings and back into the hands of skilled female practitioners within communities. In humanitarian settings are highlighted in UNFPA guidelines, they provide dignity kits and mobile reproductive clinics, ensuring that a woman's rights are not suspended during wars or climate catastrophes. The World Bank influences women's health not through medical advice but through economic leverages. As a lender, it views health as human capital, essential for economic growth. This is often executed through result based financing, where government receive loans only if they can prove specific outcomes, such as an increase in hospital deliveries. However, that creates a target chasing risk. As Sen and Anand 2024 argue, if a government is desperate for funding, it may pressure healthcare workers to meet numerical targets, such as sterilization or IUD insertions, at the expense of true informed consent. Despite this risk, the bank remains the primary funder of the hard side of health, building the roads, hospital, and digital billing systems that allow global policies to function. A human right based approach, HRBA, shifts the perception of women's health from charity or social welfare to a legal obligation. By integrating international human rights law into healthcare, global policies provide a mechanism for accountability when services fail to meet gender specific needs. The AAAQ framework established by General Comment Number 14 of the UN Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights serve as the definite goal audit tool for evaluating healthcare services. In the context of women's health, these four pillars highlight the critical gap between merely having a clinic, building, and having a functional, right-compliant healthcare system. As Sen and Anand 2024 argue in their review of health equity, the AAA framework moves the conversation from charity to accountability, ensuring that the state meets its obligation to all female citizens. The four pillars of the AAAQ frameworks are: first, accountability. This requires a sufficient quantity of funding public health and healthcare facilities. For women, availability is not just about general hospitals. It includes specialized services such as cervical cancer screening, prenatal care, and a consistent supply of modern contraceptives. Without these specific commodities, a health system fails the availability test for half its population. Accessibility. This pillar is multidimensional, ensuring that services are within reach of everyone. As the WHO 2024 guidelines specifically specifies, accessibility includes non-discrimination, means reaching Dalit or trans women, physical accessibility, proximity to rural areas, economic accessibility, affordability under universal health coverage, and information accessible, the right to sexual health education. Third, acceptability. To be rights compliant, services must be culturally appropriate and ethically sound. In women's health, this often translates to ensuring the presence of female practitioners for those who require them and respecting traditional cultural practices that do not cause medical harm. This pillar is essential for overcoming the trust deficit that often prevents marginalized women from seeking formal care. And fourth, quality. Finally, services must be medically and scientifically appropriate. A clinic is not considered right compliant simply because it is open. It must maintain high standards of hygiene and be staffed by skilled birth attendants. Sen and Anand 2024 emphasize that poor quality care, such as unhygienic labor ward, is a violation of a woman's right to health, as it replaces the hope of healing with the risk of iatrogenic harm. As the World Health Organization mandates, consent must be free, prior, and informed, occurring entirely without the shadow of financial incentives or the duress of target-chasing behavior. International frameworks, including the FIGO guidelines and various UN statements, have been instrumental in providing the legal leverage to outlaw the forced sterilization of marginalized women, HIV-positive individuals, and trans people. These policies assert that medical procedures performed without authentic consent are not clinical errors, but state-sanctioned violation of human rights. By shifting the medical gaze from the need of the state to the rights of the individual, these global blueprints ensure that no woman is treated as a demographic unit to be managed. The transition towards clinical justice reached a tipping point with the WHO's landmark statement on the prevention and elimination of disrespectful and abuse during facility-based childbirth. This policy effectively redefined bad service as a human right violation, holding health system accountable for practices that were once normalized, such as physical abuse, non-consensus episiotomies, or the detention of women in facilities due to an inability to pay. According to UN Women 2026, these protections are essential for closing the implementation gap and ensuring that the clinic remains a space for healing rather than a site of second-hand subjugation. The politics of funding demonstrate that even when international rights are clearly defined, the actual delivery of services remains highly vulnerable to shifting geopolitical tides. The most prominent example of this is the Mexico City policy, widely known as Global Gag Rule. This United States government policy blocks the US federal funding for foreign non-governmental organizations, NGOs, that provide abortion services, referrals, or even advocate for the decriminalization of abortion, even if those organizations use their own separate non-US funds for these specific activities. When implemented, the policy creates a massive disruption in the global health ecosystem. Because the United States is the world's largest donor to global health, the gag rule forced local NGOs in the global south into a catch 2020. They must choose between receiving essential funding for general health programs or providing comprehensive reproductive care. As Sen and Anand argue in their review of health equity, this policy effectively fragmented the supply chain of agency as clinics that once provided a wide range of services, including HIV testing and maternal nutrition, are forced to close or scale back due to the loss of American support. Counterintuitively, research has shown that rather than reducing abortion, the policy often leads to an increase in the unsafe abortion. This occurs because the closure of these clinics reduces access to modern contraceptives, leading to higher rates of unintended pregnancies. By 2026, the global health community recognizes the gag rule as a primary driver of the implementation gap, where political ideologies in the global north can directly undermine the bodily sovereignty and survival of women in global south. The instability of global funding creates what sociologists call a chilling effect, where the constant threat of policy shift stifles long-term healthcare planning. Because the global gag rule is frequently rescinded by Democratic US administration and reinstated by Republican ones, local health providers in the global south exist in a state of permanent funding whiplash. This clinical uncertainty, as noted by UN Women 2026, prevents clinics from establishing the stable multi-year program necessary to address chronic health issues or systemic barriers. One of the most devastating consequences of this whiplash is the closure of integrated clinics. Shifting political climates lead to sudden withdrawal of support from facilities that provide one-stop care. For example, a clinic that offers maternal checkups, HIV testing, and family planning may be forced to shut down entirely if just one part of its mission, such as reproductive right advocacy, conflicts with the specific conditions of the new donor administration. This fragmentation, described by Schott and Jeter 2022, forces women to navigate a disconnected landscape of specialized providers, often increasing their time poverty and reducing the likelihood that they will receive comprehensive care. A major critique of modern global health governance is the prevalence of vertical funding, a model where financial resources are siloed or earmarked strictly for a specific disease or outcome, such as HIV/AIDS, malaria, or polio. While vertical funding initiatives, most notably programs like PEPFAR for HIV, have saved millions of lives, they can inadvertently weaken the horizontal services which compromise the general integrated primary care systems that women rely on for their everyday health. As Sen and Anand 2024 argue, this funding structure often prioritizes donor-driven matrix over the holistic need of the patient. The siloing of Care creates a fragmented clinical experience where a woman may visit a facility that is exceptionally well funded for HIV, antiretrovirals, but find that the same clinic lacks basic gynecological equipment, mental health support, or resources for domestic violence screening. According to WHO 2024, this approach effectively treats the women as a collection of disjointed diseases rather than a whole person with integrated right-based needs. By 2026, the global health community recognized that the siloing of body is a primary barrier to achieving health sovereignty, as it forces women to navigate multiple disconnected systems to address a single life experience. Let us understand the translation of global policy to local policy. The implementation gap represents the profound chasm between a country's formal legal commitments, de jure, and the actual lived reality of service delivery, de facto. As observed in many nations across sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia, including India, constitutions often guarantee the right to health and gender equality as a matter of principle. However, these nations continue to struggle with high maternal mortality ratios, MMR, illustrating that a right-based policy on paper does not automatically translate into health sovereignty for women on the ground. In the Indian context, despite the National Health Policy 2017 and the Janani Suraksha Yojana, which provides cash incentives for institutional births, maternal deaths remain heavily concentrated in marginalized communities. According to National Family Health Survey 2021, as mentioned in IIPS and ICF, this gap is sustained by informal barriers that policy language often overlooks. These include the lack of reliable rural transport, the hidden out-of-pocket cost of supposedly free care, and the persistent social permission barrier where a woman's access to clinic is mediated by family or community approval. A core tenet of modern global policy in 2026 is that gender-sensitive care should not be a niche specialty, rather than it must be integrated into the very DNA of the entire health system. This move towards gender mainstreaming ensures that the specific biological and social realities of women are considered at every level of medical intervention. As the WHO 2024 emphasizes, a health system that ignores gender is a system that inherently risks clinical error and the reinforcement of the subordination trap. Global standards now mandate that gender-based violence, GBV, screening should be a routine part of primary care, performed with the same regularity as checking blood pressure. A truly gender-sensitive system recognizes that a woman presenting with invisible symptoms such as chronic pain, persistent headaches, or gastrointestinal issues may actually be experiencing the physical manifestation of domestic abuse. By normalizing these screenings, the clinical space becomes a critical point of intervention for health agency, allowing providers to identify risks that traditional disease-focused model often overlooks. Let us discuss the digital governance and future of advocacy. The digital revolution has fundamentally reshaped women's health, yet global policy is still racing to address the accompanying risks. Digital governance has emerged as a critical frontier, focusing on how sensitive health data is collected, utilized, and protected. As Sen and Anand 2024 highlight, the digital sphere is a double-edged sword. It offers unprecedented pathways to health agency while simultaneously creating a new vector for structural violence. On the one hand, mobile health, called mHealth, applications are successfully bypassing traditional gatekeepers such as restrictive family structures or overburdened local clinics by providing rural women with direct private access to reproductive health information and teleconsultation. This technological leap helps dismantle the permission barrier, allowing women to seek care with a degree of autonomy previously unavailable in traditional settings. Conversely, without robust global data protections, digital tools like period trackers or fertility apps risk becoming instruments of surveillance. In regions where reproductive rights are legally restricted, these digital footprints can be weaponized against women, turning a health tool into a forensic record. According to UN Women 2026, global policy is pivoting towards data sovereignty, asserting that women must own their health data. This movement also seeks to close the digital gender gap, ensuring that unequal internet access does not become a new form of health exclusion that further traps the most marginalized in a cycle of resource poverty. The most significant evolution in global advocacy is the transition from limited framework of reproductive choice to the more expensive structural framework of reproductive justice. While choice often assumes an individual possesses the financial and social resources to make a medical decision, such as choosing a specific contraceptive or an abortion, reproductive justice acknowledges that for millions of women, these choices are non-existent due to crushing weight of poverty, systemic racism, or complete lack of infrastructure. As Schott and Zitcher 2022 point out in their analysis of health beyond reproduction, the choice model often inadvertently centers the experience of privileged women while ignoring the subordination trap faced by marginalized. Originating from Black feminist scholars and now formally adopted by global bodies like UN Women 2026, this framework is built upon three transformative tenets that redefine health sovereignty. The first is the right not to have children, which ensures access to contraception and safe abortion. The second is the right to have children, guaranteeing access to maternal care and fertility support, a direct challenge to the history of coercive population control. And the third and perhaps most radical is the right to parent children in safe and healthy environment, which demands that a woman's health be viewed as inseparable from her freedom from violence, environmental toxins, and unwarranted state intervention. Thank you.